This case takes place in Toledo, Ohio, in the summer of 1981. Meet Cynthia Anderson. In August of that year, Cynthia was just 20 years old, working her first real job as a legal secretary at a small law office on East Manhattan Boulevard. To the people who loved her, she went by a shorter name, and that's the name you're going to hear me use for most of this video. So when I suddenly start calling her Cindy, that's why. Cindy was raised in a strict, devoutly Christian household by her parents, Michael and Margaret Anderson. Faith wasn't just something the family practiced on Sundays. It shaped almost every decision in Cindy's life. She didn't drink, and she didn't run with a wild crowd. And by the summer of 1981, she had already made a major decision about her future. She had put in her 2 weeks' notice at the law firm and was preparing to leave for Bible college, where she planned to continue her studies alongside her boyfriend. For a young woman so anchored to routine, to family, and to her faith, what happened next made absolutely no sense to anyone who knew her. But before we get to the day she vanished, we need to talk about something strange that had been building for almost a year. For roughly 12 months leading up to her disappearance, Cindy had been suffering from recurring nightmares. In these dreams, she was abducted. In these dreams, she was murdered. She mentioned them to her mother more than once, but Margaret didn't think much of it at the time. Nightmares are nightmares after all. Nobody could have known that Cindy's subconscious might have been trying to tell her something. Then, in the weeks before she disappeared, real-world warnings started to stack up. Someone spray-painted a message on a wall facing the law office where Cindy worked. It read, "I love you, Cindy," by G.W. It was painted over by building maintenance, and then it reappeared. Understandably, this rattled her. She had no idea who G.W. was, and neither did anyone else at the firm. Around the same time, Cindy began receiving strange, unsettling phone calls at her desk. A client of hers later told investigators that he witnessed her taking one of these calls the day before she disappeared, and that she looked visibly shaken by it. When he asked if something was wrong, she admitted the office had been getting several calls like it, but she wouldn't say what was actually being said on the other end of the line. Her employers took the threat seriously enough to install a panic buzzer at her desk in case she ever needed to alert the store next door. She was told to keep the office doors locked at all times, even during business hours, and to only let visitors in after they rang for entry. Cindy did exactly that. She was cautious, she was careful, but sadly, it didn't matter. Now, let's get to the morning of Tuesday, August 4th, 1981. Cindy arrived at the office like she always did. Because she often worked alone in the mornings before her co-workers came in, she locked the door behind her, just as she had been told. A janitor working nearby later confirmed he saw her at her desk around 9:45 that morning. Everything appeared completely normal. At around noon, two of her co-workers returned to the office and found it empty. At first, nothing looked obviously wrong, which somehow made it worse once they started noticing the details. The radio was on, the lights were on, the air conditioner was running. Mail that had arrived that morning had been tucked neatly into the front door handle, something Cindy would never have done, since she always brought the mail inside herself. There was no note taped to the door, and leaving a note when she stepped away was something Cindy did without fail. Her purse was gone, her car keys were gone, but her car was still sitting in the parking lot where she had left it. And then there was the book. Cindy had been reading a romance novel at her desk between tasks, something she often did during quiet moments. Her co-workers found it left open face down on the desk. When they looked at the page, it was open to the one scene in the entire novel where the female protagonist was abducted. Whether that was a horrifying coincidence or something more deliberate, nobody has ever been able to say for certain. The doors were locked from the inside. There was no sign of a forced entry, no broken glass, no damaged locks, no overturned furniture, nothing that pointed to a struggle. It was as if Cindy had simply been erased from the middle of an ordinary workday in a locked office in broad daylight. Police were called immediately, and the search for Cynthia Anderson began that same afternoon. Investigators combed the entire office for any signs of physical evidence, but came up with almost nothing. No fingerprints that belonged to anyone who wasn't affiliated with the office. No blood. No forced point of entry that could explain how anyone had gotten in or how Cindy had gotten out without a key of her own or someone she trusted opening that door for them. Because there was no evidence of a break-in, investigators had to consider a difficult possibility that Cindy had opened that locked door herself for someone she recognized. As the investigation widened, detectives zeroed in on the law office itself and the kind of clients it represented. One of the attorneys connected to the firm was a man named Richard Neller. He was at the time representing a client named Jose Rodriguez Jr. on drug-related charges. Investigators developed a theory that Cindy, working in close proximity to sensitive conversations day after day, may have overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear. Conversations about drug deals between Neller and Rodriguez. If that information got back to the wrong person, it's not hard to imagine why someone might have wanted her silenced. Neller and Rodriguez were never officially charged in connection with Cindy's disappearance, but years later, in 1995, when Rodriguez stood trial on unrelated drug charges, an informant testified that Rodriguez had confessed to killing Cynthia Anderson. A judge, however, ultimately ruled that testimony to be unreliable, and it was thrown out. No charges were ever filed over Cindy specifically. Both men were convicted on drug offenses instead and sent to prison. Neller was eventually disbarred by the American Bar Association. He was released from prison in the year 2001 and was later found working illegally as a paralegal. Despite being permanently barred from any role in the legal field in Toledo, He died in 2024, having never formally been connected to Cindy's case, and having never, as far as anyone knows, said a word about what really happened to her. The drug angle wasn't the only theory investigators chased. Around the same period, two brothers named Anthony and Nathaniel Cook were convicted of a combined 9 murders across Ohio through the 1980s. Given the timing and the location, detectives looked at whether the brothers could have had any connection to Cindy's disappearance. Both denied any involvement, and nothing was ever found to tie them to her case. There was also a third man, a separate convicted murderer who was already serving time in an Ohio prison, who investigators considered a person of interest at various points. That man has never been publicly named, and no connection to Cindy has ever been proven. To this day, none of these individuals have been formally ruled out, and none have been formally charged. But perhaps the strangest twist in this entire case came about a month after Cindy vanished. In September of 1981, police received an anonymous phone call from a woman. She was whispering, clearly frightened, and refused to give her name. She told the investigators on the line that Cynthia was being held against her will in the basement of a white house. She said there were 2 houses next to each other on the same property, both owned by the same family, and that the parents who owned them were currently out of town. According to the caller, it was the son of that family who was holding Cindy captive inside. When police pressed her for an address, the woman grew more afraid and hung up. She called back a short time later, but when they pushed her again for details that could actually help them locate the property, she hung up a second time and was never heard from again. Officers searched for matching properties, 2 white houses side by side owned by one family, but they came up with nothing solid enough to act on. So, was this a genuine terrified witness who knew exactly where Cindy was and was too scared to say more? Or was it a cruel hoax, the kind that unfortunately tends to surface in high-profile missing persons cases? More than 40 years later, nobody knows, and the houses, if they ever existed as described, were never identified. Separately, the man behind the "I love you Cindy" spray paint eventually came forward. He turned out to be a maintenance worker connected to the shopping plaza where the law office was located, and he explained that the message had actually been meant for a completely different Cindy, not Cynthia Anderson at all. Investigators found no evidence linking him to her disappearance, and he was never charged with anything related to the case. Over the following decades, Cindy's case went cold, then resurfaced, then went cold again. Her story was eventually featured on Unsolved Mysteries, bringing her face and her story to a national audience and generating a fresh wave of tips, theories, and speculation. Some viewers were convinced Cindy had staged her own disappearance and walked away from her old life entirely, perhaps overwhelmed by pressure from her strict upbringing or eager to start over somewhere new. There were even a handful of unconfirmed reports over the years claiming she had been spotted living in Texas. None of those reports have ever been substantiated, but there are real problems with the theory that Cindy simply walked away. She was devoted to her family. She cared deeply about her siblings. She had just committed to a future in Bible college with the man she loved. Her father always maintained that it would have been completely out of character for her to leave without a word, and that no amount of pressure at home explained cutting off contact with the people who loved her most permanently without even a single phone call in over 40 years. For Cindy's parents, the not knowing became its own kind of sentence. Margaret Anderson passed away from cancer in 1983, just 2 years after her daughter vanished, without ever learning what happened to her. Michael Anderson spent the rest of his life clinging to hope, giving interviews decades later, still holding on to the possibility that his daughter might one day come home. He passed away in January of 2008, and in his obituary, it was quietly noted that Cynthia had preceded him in death, a small, aching acknowledgement that after 27 years, the family had made peace with the likelihood they would never see her alive again. So, where does that leave us today? Cynthia Anderson's case remains completely unsolved. No one has ever been arrested. No one has ever been charged. Her body, if she is in fact deceased, has never been recovered. What we're left with is a locked office, a missing purse, a book turned exactly to one violent page, a spray painted message meant for a stranger, a whispered phone call about a house that was never found, and a list of suspects who were investigated, questioned, and ultimately never tied to what happened to her.